My daughter-in-law had just boarded her flight at Hartsfield-Jackson when my 8-year-old grandson leaned close and whispered the words that changed everything. "Grandpa, we can't stay here. We need to go." The urgency in Malik's voice hit me like ice water. I was holding a paper coffee cup, watching Keisha's plane taxi toward the runway, when his small hand gripped my arm with surprising strength. The cup trembled in my fingers, hot liquid sloshing against the sides. "What do you mean, son?" I asked, looking down into his dark eyes. They were wide, restless, darting toward the glass windows where her plane was slowly moving away from us. Malik pressed his lips together, glancing around the crowded terminal like he was afraid someone might hear. Then he whispered again, so soft I had to lean down to catch the words, "She's gone. We have to leave." That's when my hands started shaking for real. The coffee cup crumpled, sending scalding liquid across my fingers and onto the airport carpet. My legs felt weak, but something deeper than fear pushed me upright. At 67 years old, I'd learned to trust my instincts. And right now, every instinct was screaming that my grandson knew something I didn't. Something dangerous. I took his clammy hand in mine, feeling how rigid his little knuckles were. "Tell me what's wrong, Malik." His eyes filled with tears. "She said not to tell you. But she's not coming back." The terminal buzzed around us, travelers rushing to gates, announcements crackling over speakers, the constant hum of people going places. But I felt like I was standing in dead silence. Because when a child whispers like that, when a child carries that kind of fear, you listen. I thought about the way Keisha had walked toward that boarding gate. Her shoulders never turned back toward us. Her eyes never searched for Malik one last time. The smile she gave when she handed him over to me wasn't the smile of a mother leaving for a business trip. It was the smile of someone closing a door forever. "Come on," I said, tugging Malik's hand. "We're leaving." We moved through the crowd, past families saying goodbye, past business travelers checking phones. Nobody paid attention to an old black man and his grandson walking quickly toward the exit. We stepped into the parking garage where the air was thick with exhaust fumes and Georgia humidity. My hands were still shaking when I tried to unlock my old Buick. The key scraped against the metal twice before I managed to get it in. Malik climbed into the passenger seat without a word, buckling his seatbelt and staring straight ahead. As I started the engine, my mind raced back over the past 5 years. Keisha had married my son DeMarcus after a whirlwind romance that always felt too fast, too convenient. She carried secrets like most women carried purses, always clutched close, never set down where anyone could peek inside. When DeMarcus died in that construction accident last year, she barely shed a tear at the funeral. I wanted to believe it was shock, grief taking people different ways. But something about her reaction never sat right with me. Now, sitting in this parking garage with my grandson's fear filling the car like smoke, I knew my instincts had been right all along. "Malik," I said softly, pulling out of the parking space. "What exactly did your mama tell you?" He looked at me with those serious eyes that reminded me so much of his daddy. "She said people would come looking. That we shouldn't be here when they do." My blood turned cold. Not because I didn't believe him, but because I did. Completely. As we drove out of Hartsfield-Jackson Airport, leaving Keisha's plane to disappear into the evening sky, I realized our quiet life in Macon was about to become something else entirely. Because when a child warns you that hunters are coming, you better start running. The drive from Atlanta to Macon usually took me an hour and 15 minutes. That night, it felt like crossing into another world. Malik sat quiet beside me, watching the highway lights streak past his window. The radio played soft gospel, but I could barely hear it over the sound of my own heartbeat. Every few miles, I checked the rearview mirror, looking for headlights that followed too long or cars that changed lanes when I did. "Grandpa." Malik's voice was small in the darkness. "Yes, son. Are we in trouble?" I wanted to lie, to tell him everything would be fine. But this boy had just saved us from something I didn't even understand yet. He deserved honesty. "I don't know," I said. But whatever your mama was afraid of, we're going to figure it out together." He nodded like that made perfect sense. Children have a way of accepting hard truths that adults spend years trying to avoid. "She cried when she told me," Malik said suddenly. "Last night, after you went to bed. She said she was sorry, but she had to go away and couldn't take me with her." My hands tightened on the steering wheel. "Did she say why?" "She said she'd done something bad. That people were coming to hurt her, and maybe hurt me too if I was with her." He turned to look at me, his face serious in the dashboard light. "She said you were the only person she trusted to keep me safe." The irony hit me like a slap. Keisha, who'd kept secrets from our family for 5 years, who'd barely shown emotion at her own husband's funeral, trusted me to protect the child she was abandoning. As we passed through small towns with their lonely gas stations and closed diners, I found myself thinking about DeMarcus. My son had been a good man, honest to a fault, hardworking, the kind of person who'd stop to help strangers change flat tires. He'd worked construction, mostly commercial buildings around Atlanta, and he'd been proud of his work. The accident happened on a Tuesday morning last March. Scaffolding collapse, they said. Faulty equipment. 3 men injured, 1 dead. My son. I'd accepted it because accidents happen in construction. It's dangerous work. But now, driving through the night with my grandson's warning echoing in my ears, I wondered if I'd been a fool. "Malik, did your daddy ever talk to you about his work? About problems he might have been having?" The boy was quiet for a long moment. Then, he was upset about something. A few weeks before the accident, I heard him and Mama arguing late at night. "What kind of arguing?" "Daddy said somebody was stealing money. That he had to tell someone or people could get hurt." Malik's voice got smaller. Mama kept saying it wasn't his business. That he should stay quiet. My stomach dropped. DeMarcus had found something. Something worth killing for. We pulled into my driveway at 11:30. The little brick house sat dark and quiet, surrounded by the familiar sounds of Macon at night, crickets, distant traffic, the hum of air conditioners working against the heat. I'd lived here for 15 years, ever since my wife Lorraine passed. It had always felt safe. Tonight, it felt like we were walking into a trap. I carried Malik's overnight bag inside and turned on the kitchen light. The house smelled like the cornbread I'd made that morning, back when my biggest worry was whether Malik would eat his vegetables at dinner. "You hungry, son?" He shook his head, but I warmed some cornbread anyway. Routine helps when the world turns upside down. I set the plate in front of him and watched him pick at it without appetite. "Grandpa," he said finally, "what if the bad people find us here?" I looked at this brave little boy who just lost his mother to whatever mess she'd gotten herself into. Who'd already lost his father to what I was starting to believe wasn't an accident at all. The anger that had been building in my chest all evening finally crystallized into something harder, more focused. Then they'll learn that this old man isn't as helpless as they think. I meant every word. Because sitting in that kitchen, watching my grandson struggle with fears no 8-year-old should carry, I made myself a promise. Whatever had killed my son, whatever had scared Keisha into abandoning her child, I was going to find the truth. And when I did, somebody was going to pay. I didn't even try to sleep that night. After getting Malik settled in the spare bedroom, I sat in my old recliner with my shotgun across my lap. The weapon felt familiar in my hands. I'd learned to shoot during my 2 years in the Army, back when I was 19 and thought I knew everything. 48 years later, holding that gun again, I realized how little I'd actually known about real danger. The house settled around me with its usual creaks and sighs. Outside, the cicadas sang their late summer song, and somewhere down the street, Mrs. Patterson's dog barked at shadows. Normal sounds for a normal night in my neighborhood. But nothing about this night felt normal. I checked the locks twice. Front door, back door, all the windows. I'd lived in this house for 15 years and never worried about security. Macon wasn't Atlanta. We knew our neighbors, looked out for each other. The worst crime we usually saw was teenagers spray painting the water tower. Tonight I felt like prey. Around midnight, I made coffee and stood at the kitchen window, looking out at the street. A few porch lights glowed yellow in the darkness. The Johnsons' house across the way was dark. They went to bed early since Herman started working the morning shift at the plant. Everything looked exactly like it should. That's what made me nervous. At 1:30, I checked on Malik. He was sleeping hard, one arm wrapped around the stuffed elephant his daddy had won him at the county fair last year. Seeing him peaceful like that made my chest tight. This boy had already lost his father. Now his mother had abandoned him to whatever mess she'd created. I wouldn't let him lose me too. Back in the living room, I positioned myself where I could see both the front window and the hallway to Malik's room. The shotgun leaned against my leg, loaded and ready. My military training kicked in without me thinking about it. Watch the approaches, control your breathing, stay alert but don't let adrenaline make you jumpy. The clock on the mantel ticked past 2 o'clock. Then 2:30. Then 3 o'clock. At 3:14 a.m., headlights swept across my front yard. The car moved slowly down the street, too slowly for someone just driving home. I stayed perfectly still, watching through the gap in my curtains as it stopped 3 houses down, engine idling. The headlights went dark, but the car didn't move. My heart started pounding, but my hands stayed steady. 20 minutes the car sat there, just waiting. Then it crept forward, stopping directly across from my house. 2 doors opened. 2 men stepped out, both wearing dark clothes, both moving with the careful precision of people who knew they shouldn't be there. One pointed toward my front door while the other gestured toward the back of the house. They were flanking me. I stood up slowly, shotgun in my hands, and moved to the front window. The first man was already halfway across my yard, staying in the shadows cast by the old oak tree. The second had disappeared around the side of the house, heading for my back door. Professional. Coordinated. These weren't random criminals looking for easy targets. These were the people Keisha had warned Malik about. I flicked on the front porch floodlight. The sudden brightness froze both men like deer. The one in my yard threw his hand up to shield his eyes, stumbling backward. I heard the other one curse from somewhere near my back fence. Then I pumped the shotgun. The sound echoed through the night air like thunder. Every dog in the neighborhood started barking. Porch lights began flicking on up and down the street. "Y'all got 10 seconds to get off my property," I called through the front door, loud enough for the whole block to hear. After that, I start shooting. The man in my yard didn't need 10 seconds. He was already running toward the car, his partner close behind. Doors slammed, engine roared, and they disappeared down the street faster than they'd come. I stood there in the sudden quiet, heart hammering against my ribs, listening to the neighborhood slowly settle back to normal. Mrs. Patterson's dog was still barking. The Johnsons' porch lights stayed on for another few minutes before clicking off. Behind me, a small voice said, "Grandpa?" I turned to see Malik standing in the hallway, rubbing his eyes. I heard a loud noise. "Just some folks who got lost," I said, setting the shotgun aside and walking over to him. "They found their way home now." He nodded, accepting this explanation the way children do. I walked him back to his room, tucked him in, and waited until his breathing got deep and even again. But I didn't go back to the recliner. Instead, I went to the kitchen and made more coffee. Because I finally understood what we were dealing with. Keisha hadn't just abandoned her son. She'd used him as bait, left him with me knowing those men would come looking. She'd counted on my love for Malik to keep him safe while she disappeared into whatever new life she'd planned. The next morning, I knew hiding wouldn't save us. If Keisha had left us as bait, I needed to know who was hunting and why. The next morning, I loaded Malik into the Buick and drove to the Bibb County Library. If those men were watching my house, they'd expect us to stay home and hide. They wouldn't expect an old postal worker to start digging into public records. "Where are we going, Grandpa?" Malik asked as we pulled into the library parking lot. "Research," I said, helping him out of the car. "Your daddy always said the truth leaves tracks. We're going to follow them." The library was quiet on a Wednesday morning. A few college students hunched over laptops, some retirees reading newspapers. The kind of peaceful place where an old man and his grandson could blend in without drawing attention. I settled Malik in the children's section with a stack of picture books. "Stay right here where I can see you," I told him. "Don't talk to strangers, and if anyone asks where your mama is, you say she's at work." He nodded seriously. This boy was learning to keep secrets the hard way. The public records section was tucked away on the second floor. 27 years working for the Postal Service had taught me how to navigate government paperwork. People think mail carriers just deliver letters, but we track everything: addresses, forwarding requests, delivery confirmations. We know how to find information when we need it. I started with property records. DeMarcus had owned a small piece of land outside Atlanta, inherited from my father. Nothing valuable, just 5 acres of pine trees and red clay that the family had held onto for sentimental reasons. But land deals leave paper trails, especially when money changes hands. It took me 2 hours to find what I was looking for. The property had been sold 6 weeks before DeMarcus died. Sale price, $480,000. Buyer, Meridian Construction Group. The same company where my son had worked. My hands started shaking as I read the documents. DeMarcus had never mentioned selling the land. He'd never said anything about needing money. But here was his signature on the deed transfer, and here was the payment confirmation. Except the money hadn't gone to my son. The payment had been transferred directly into an account belonging to Keisha Thompson. My daughter-in-law had sold my son's inheritance without him knowing, then kept every penny. I sat back in the hard library chair, staring at the papers spread in front of me. Malik was visible through the glass partition, quietly reading a book about dinosaurs. He had no idea his mother was a thief. But theft was just the beginning. I kept digging. The sale had been completed on March 3rd. DeMarcus died on March 18th, exactly 2 weeks later. Long enough for someone to realize the transaction had been discovered. Long enough to plan an accident. I found the bank records next. Keisha's account showed the $480,000 deposit on March 4th. Then, 3 days after DeMarcus's funeral, the money disappeared. Wired overseas to an account in the Cayman Islands. She'd planned everything. The theft, the murder, the escape. While I was grieving my son and she was playing the heartbroken widow, she'd already moved our family's money beyond the reach of American law. My chest felt tight with rage, but I forced myself to keep reading. Anger clouds judgment, and I needed clarity now. The construction company records showed something else interesting. Meridian had bought 17 properties in the past year, all from families who'd worked for the company. All at prices well above market value. All transferred into accounts controlled by company executives or their relatives. It was a money laundering operation. Buy worthless land at inflated prices, clean dirty money through legitimate real estate transactions. My son must have figured it out. I thought about what Malik had told me the night before. Daddy said somebody was stealing money. That he had to tell someone or people could get hurt. DeMarcus had discovered the scheme. He'd threatened to expose it. So they'd killed him and used his wife to cover their tracks. By the time I finished reading, it was past noon. Malik had fallen asleep in a beanbag chair, surrounded by picture books. He looked so peaceful, so innocent. Nothing like the confused, frightened child who'd warned me at the airport yesterday. I gathered the documents and made copies of everything. 27 years of handling mail had taught me to always keep backups. Then I woke Malik gently and walked him to the car. "Did you find what you were looking for?" he asked as we drove home. "Some of it," I said. "But I think your mama left more clues for us to find." That was when I remembered the safety deposit box key I'd found in Keisha's jewelry box the week after DeMarcus's funeral. She'd claimed it was for storing her grandmother's wedding ring. I'd believed her then. I didn't believe anything she told me anymore. But the money trail was just the beginning. What I found in that safety deposit box would reveal a conspiracy that reached far beyond my son's death. That safety deposit box key had been bothering me for months. After lunch, I drove Malik and myself to First National Bank downtown. The same bank where DeMarcus had done his business, where Keisha had maintained accounts I was only now learning about. The building was one of those old Southern institutions with marble columns and brass fixtures, the kind of place that made you lower your voice just walking through the door. "I need to access box 247, I told the clerk, a young woman with kind eyes who reminded me of my daughter if I'd had one. "I'll need to see identification and verify you're on the access list," she said politely. I handed over my license, hoping Keisha had been careless enough to put my name on the account. She had been. Probably figured I'd never have reason to look. The woman led Malik and me down to the vault area. Those basement rooms always made me nervous. Too much concrete, too many locks between you and the outside world. But I needed to know what my daughter-in-law had hidden from us. Box 247 was small, about the size of a shoebox. Inside were 3 items that changed everything. First, a passport. Not Keisha's. This one belonged to someone named Maria Santos, with Keisha's photograph. The stamp dates showed she'd been planning this escape for over a year, taking trips to establish the identity. Second, a folded note in her handwriting. "If anything happens, he knows everything. Trust no one except Vernon with Malik. The boy is innocent." Third, a small flash drive that looked like it held more secrets than I was ready for. My hands trembled as I slipped everything into my jacket pocket. Malik watched quietly, sensing this wasn't the time for questions. The boy had already learned more about adult deception than any 8-year-old should. Back home, I set up my old laptop on the kitchen table. The computer was 5 years old and slow, but it would have to do. When I plugged in the flash drive, a password screen appeared. I tried everything I could think of. Keisha's birthday, DeMarcus's birthday, their anniversary. Nothing worked. Whatever was on this drive, she'd protected it carefully. "Grandpa, you look frustrated," Malik said from his spot at the counter, working on a coloring book. "I'm a son. This computer isn't cooperating with me." That's when I remembered Terrell Williams, the 19-year-old who lived 2 streets over. His grandmother went to my church, and I'd heard he was studying computer technology at the community college. Smart kid who'd helped half the neighborhood set up their internet. I called Mrs. Williams and explained I needed technical help with an old computer. Within an hour, Terrell was sitting at my kitchen table, looking at the password screen with professional interest. "This is encrypted pretty heavy," he said, fingers flying over the keyboard. "Your daughter-in-law knew what she was doing. But encryption has weaknesses if you know where to look." If you're watching this story and finding it as shocking as I did, hit that subscribe button now. Because what we discovered on that flash drive was just the beginning of a conspiracy that would shake our entire community to its core. Terrell worked for 2 hours, occasionally muttering to himself about code sequences and security protocols. Malik fell asleep on the couch, exhausted from the day's revelations. I made coffee and watched this young man work magic with technology one barely understood. "Got it," Terrell finally said. Password was hidden in the file creation date. Clever. The flash drive opened to reveal dozens of folders filled with documents, spreadsheets, and photographs. I leaned over Terrell's shoulder as he scrolled through the contents, my heart sinking with each new discovery. "Mr. Thompson," Terrell said quietly, "I think you need to see this alone." I thanked him and walked him to the door, pressing $50 into his hand despite his protests. Some secrets are too dangerous to share with innocent people. Back at the computer, I opened the first folder labeled Construction Contracts. What I found made my blood run cold. Meridian Construction wasn't just buying overpriced land. They were running a massive money laundering operation through fake construction projects. Drug money from cartels was being cleaned through legitimate-looking contracts for buildings that were never built, roads that were never paved, infrastructure projects that existed only on paper. The spreadsheets showed coded names and offshore accounts. MC1 through MC4747 different money flows totaling millions of dollars. Each transaction was carefully documented with dates, amounts, and destination accounts. But the most damning evidence was in a folder labeled government contracts. Names I recognized from the local news, city council members, county commissioners, even a state senator, all receiving payments disguised as consulting fees. DeMarcus had stumbled onto this while reviewing legitimate contracts for his construction crew. My son, honest to his core, had started asking questions about projects that didn't make sense. Projects where the money didn't match the work being done. In a subfolder labeled Insurance, I found the truth about my son's death. A memo from someone identified only as MW outlined the DT problem. DeMarcus Thompson was asking too many questions and needed to be handled permanently. The fake accident had been planned 3 days in advance. My hands shook as I read my son's death warrant, written in cold corporate language like he was just another business expense to be eliminated. But the most terrifying discovery was in the final folder labeled Cleanup. Plans to eliminate anyone who might have knowledge of the operation. Keisha's name was on the list, along with mine and Malik's. We weren't just witnesses. We were loose ends waiting to be tied up. When those files finally opened completely, what I saw made my hands shake worse than facing those men in my yard. Keisha hadn't just killed my son, she'd uncovered something that could destroy half of Georgia's political establishment. The deeper I dug into those files, the more my son's murder started making sense. And the more terrified I became for Malik's safety. I spent the next 3 hours mapping out the conspiracy on notebook paper, using the same organizational skills that had made me a good postal supervisor. Every route has connections, every address has a purpose. Criminal operations work the same way. Meridian Construction was the hub of everything. On paper, they built schools, repaired bridges, maintained county roads. In reality, they were washing drug money through fake contracts worth millions of dollars. Here's how the scheme worked. Cartels would provide cash to shell companies. Those companies would hire Meridian for construction projects that looked legitimate on government paperwork. Meridian would submit inflated invoices for work that was never completed, then kick back clean money to the cartels minus their cut. The beauty of it was the government connection. County commissioners would approve the contracts, state officials would authorize the payments, and federal oversight was minimal because everything appeared to be legitimate infrastructure spending. But my son had noticed something wrong with the numbers. In a folder labeled DT Concerns, I found emails DeMarcus had sent to his supervisor 3 weeks before his death. He'd been assigned to inspect work on Highway 75 bridge repairs, a $2.3 million project that should have taken 4 months to complete. When DeMarcus arrived at the site, he found nothing. No equipment, no workers, no signs that any construction had ever taken place. But the county had already paid Meridian $1.8 million for completion of the first phase. Something's not right here, he'd written to his boss. Either we've got the wrong address, or somebody's stealing taxpayer money. His supervisor had responded within hours, stay out of county business. Stick to your assigned projects. But DeMarcus couldn't let it go. That was my son, honest to a fault, just like his mama had raised him. He'd kept digging, visiting other project sites during his lunch breaks, taking photographs of empty lots that were supposedly under construction. In 2 weeks, he'd documented 17 different projects where Meridian had been paid for work that didn't exist. The total value was over $12 million in tax money that had disappeared into accounts controlled by people who'd never lifted a hammer. The emails showed him growing more frustrated with each discovery. These people are stealing from schools and hospitals, he'd written to Keisha. I have to report this to someone who'll listen. Keisha's responses were brief and cold. It's not your job to police the whole company. You have a family to think about. Let someone else worry about corruption. She'd been trying to keep him quiet because she was already part of the scheme. The most damning evidence was in a folder labeled KT Accounts. Keisha had been receiving monthly payments of $5,000 for administrative consulting, code for keeping her husband from asking too many questions. She'd been paid to spy on my son and report back to the people who eventually killed him. My daughter-in-law had sold out her own husband for money. I sat back in my kitchen chair, looking across at Malik sleeping peacefully on the couch. This boy's mother had traded his father's life for blood money, then abandoned him when the scheme started falling apart. But the conspiracy reached far beyond Meridian Construction. The spreadsheets showed payments to officials at every level of government. City council members received consulting fees for approving permits. County commissioners got speaking honorariums for rubber stamping contracts. Even a state senator was taking monthly payments disguised as campaign contributions. The coded names were easy to decode once I understood the pattern. MC-15 was Marcus Coleman, chairman of the county commission. MC-23 was Maria Constantine, the state senator who chaired the transportation committee. MC-31 was Martin Cruz, the city planning director who approved all major construction permits. Each official had been carefully selected for their ability to move money through government channels without oversight. Together, they created a pipeline that funneled millions of dollars from Mexican cartels through Georgia's construction industry and into legitimate American banks. DeMarcus had threatened to expose all of it. So they'd arranged his accident and counted on Keisha to clean up any evidence he might have gathered. But my son had been smarter than they realized. He'd copied everything to this flash drive and hidden it where only his family could find it. He'd trusted Keisha to do the right thing if something happened to him. He hadn't known his wife was already working for the enemy. I made backup copies of everything on 3 different flash drives, hiding them in places around the house where Malik and I could find them if we needed to run. 27 years of postal work had taught me that important documents should never exist in only one location. The question now was what to do with the evidence. Going to local police was out of the question. The files showed payments to officers throughout the sheriff's department. The FBI might be better, but federal investigations moved slowly, and we didn't have time to wait for bureaucracy. Those men had already found us once. They'd be back, and next time they might not be scared off by an old man with a shotgun. I needed help from someone with connections, someone who could get this evidence to the right people quickly. Someone who understood how corruption worked and knew how to fight it. That's when I thought about Clarence Washington. Clarence had retired from the Atlanta Tribune 2 years ago after 30 years of investigative reporting. He'd covered City Hall corruption, exposed crooked judges, brought down politicians who thought they were untouchable. More importantly, he was my friend. We'd known each other since childhood, grown up in the same neighborhood, attended the same church. If anyone could help me turn these files into justice for my son, it was Clarence. But as I reached for my phone to call him, I heard car doors slamming outside. Through the front window, I saw 2 police cruisers parked in my driveway. The corruption had resources I was only beginning to understand. And they decided it was time to silence the old man who knew too much. I quickly closed the laptop and slipped the flash drives into my pocket just as heavy footsteps approached my front door. 2 officers in Bibb County uniforms stood on my porch, their hands resting casually on their duty belts. Mr. Thompson? The older officer was white, maybe 50, with the kind of mustache that belonged in the 1980s. I'm Deputy Collins. We got a call about suspicious activity at this address. My heart hammered, but I kept my voice steady. What kind of suspicious activity? Neighbor reported seeing strange men around your property last night. Wanted to make sure you and the boy are okay. I studied his face, looking for tells. 27 years of dealing with people at the post office had taught me to read body language. This man was nervous, asking questions he already knew the answers to. "We're fine," I said. Those men left when they realized they had the wrong house. Deputy Collins nodded, but his partner, a younger black officer, was scanning my front yard like he was looking for evidence. "Mind if we come in? Just want to check things out, make sure everything's secure." "I do mind," I said politely. "It's been a long day, and my grandson is sleeping." The older deputy's expression hardened slightly. "Mr. Thompson, we're trying to help you here. If there's some kind of trouble you're dealing with, we need to know about it." Behind me, I heard Malik stirring on the couch. The boy had been through enough trauma without seeing police questioning his grandfather like a suspect. "Officers, I appreciate your concern," I said, stepping onto the porch and closing the door behind me. "But like I said, those men left. We're fine." The younger officer spoke for the first time. "Sir, your daughter-in-law left town yesterday. Her flight records show she flew to Miami with connections overseas. You mind telling us why she left her son behind?" My blood went cold. They knew about Keisha's flight. They'd been tracking her movements, which meant they knew she'd run with evidence that could destroy their operation. "Family business," I said. "She had to travel for work." "What kind of work?" Deputy Collins pressed. "The kind that's none of your business." The two officers exchanged glances. I could see them calculating their next move, wondering how far they could push an elderly man without causing problems for themselves. "Mr. Thompson," the younger officer said, "if you're in some kind of trouble, we can help. But we need you to be honest with us." "I've been honest," I replied. "Now, unless you have a warrant, I'm going back inside to check on my grandson." I turned and walked back into the house, listening to their footsteps retreat to their cruisers. Through the front window, I watched them sit in their cars for 10 minutes, radios crackling with conversations I couldn't hear. Finally, they drove away. But they'd be back. And next time, they might bring more than questions. I woke Malik gently and moved him to the back bedroom, away from the front windows. Then I called Clarence Washington. Vernon Thompson. Clarence's familiar voice carried 30 years of friendship. "What's got you calling so late?" "Clarence, I need help. The kind of help that could get you in trouble if you're not careful." The pause. Then, "Come over. Tonight." Clarence lived in a modest ranch house in East Macon, the kind of neighborhood where retired teachers and postal workers could afford to live comfortably. I'd been to his house dozens of times for church functions and community meetings. Tonight, it felt like a sanctuary. I carried Malik, still half asleep, into Clarence's living room while his wife Ruby fussed over both of us with coffee and homemade cookies. Clarence took one look at my face and sent Ruby to the kitchen. "Talk to me," he said. I told him everything. DeMarcus's murder, Keisha's betrayal, the files showing government corruption worth millions of dollars. I showed him the flash drive and watched his eyes widen as he scrolled through the evidence. "Vernon," he said finally, "this isn't just local corruption. This connects to cartels, federal money, politicians at the state level. You're sitting on the kind of story that wins Pulitzer Prizes." "I don't want prizes," I said. "I want justice for my son." Clarence nodded, understanding the difference. These people have resources, money, connections, law enforcement contacts. They'll come after you hard once they realize what you have. They already are. 2 deputies were at my house an hour ago, asking questions they shouldn't know to ask. Then we need to move fast. Clarence pulled out his phone. "I've got contacts at the Atlanta Tribune, friends at the FBI who specialize in corruption cases. But Vernon, once we start this ball rolling, there's no stopping it. You and Malik will be in danger until every one of these people is behind bars." I looked at my grandson, sleeping peacefully on Clarence's couch, trusting that the adults in his life would protect him. His father had died trying to expose the truth. His mother had sold that truth for money. Now it was up to his grandfather to finish what DeMarcus had started. "Make the calls," I said. Clarence set down the flash drive and looked at me with grave eyes. "Vernon, this doesn't just expose local corruption. This connects to a federal investigation that's been stalled for 2 years." Clarence made his first call at midnight. I listened to one side of the conversation while watching Malik sleep on the couch, this innocent boy caught in the middle of a war he didn't understand. "Patricia, it's Clarence Washington. I know it's late, but I've got something you need to see tonight." "No, not tomorrow. Tonight." He hung up and turned to me. "Agent Patricia Hayes, FBI Financial Crimes Division." We worked together on a corruption case 5 years ago. She's good people, Vernon. More importantly, she's honest. Within an hour, Agent Hayes was sitting in Clarence's living room, studying the flash drive contents on her laptop. She was younger than I'd expected, maybe 40, with the kind of sharp eyes that missed nothing. She wore jeans and a FBI windbreaker, like she'd dressed quickly after Clarence's call. "Mr. Thompson," she said after reviewing the first batch of files, "do you understand what you've uncovered here?" "My son's murder," I said simply. "Yes, but it's bigger than that. We've been investigating Meridian Construction for 2 years as part of a federal task force targeting cartel money laundering. We knew they were dirty, but we couldn't prove how the money flowed through legitimate contracts." She turned the laptop screen toward me, showing a complex organizational chart with dozens of names and connections. "Your son found the missing pieces. These spreadsheets show exactly how drug money gets cleaned through government contracts. The coded accounts, the fake projects, the political payoffs, it's all here. Why couldn't you find this before?" Agent Hayes looked frustrated. Witnesses kept disappearing. 3 construction workers who'd raised questions about fake projects died in accidents over the past year. A county clerk who'd noticed irregular payments was killed in a robbery where nothing was stolen. People got scared, stopped talking. The room felt colder. "You're saying they've killed other people?" "At least 6 that we can prove. Probably more." She closed the laptop and looked directly at me. "Mr. Thompson, you and your grandson are in serious danger. These people don't leave loose ends." I thought about the police officers who'd visited my house, asking questions they shouldn't have known to ask. Local law enforcement is compromised. Completely. Sheriff's Department, city police, even some state troopers. The cartel money buys a lot of loyalty. Agent Hayes leaned forward. "We need to get you into protective custody immediately." "No. Sir, you don't understand." "I understand perfectly." I looked at Malik, still sleeping peacefully despite the adult voices discussing murder and corruption around him. That boy has already lost his father and been abandoned by his mother. I won't let him lose me too by hiding in some government safe house. Agent Hayes exchanged glances with Clarence. "Mr. Thompson, these people have unlimited resources. They've already found you once. Then let's finish this before they find us again. You said you needed evidence to make cases. I'm giving you evidence. Use it." She was quiet for a long moment, studying my face. "It's not that simple. Building a federal case takes time. Grand jury testimony, warrant applications, coordinating with multiple agencies. We're talking months of preparation. How many more people die while you're preparing?" The question hung in the air. Agent Hayes opened her laptop again, scrolling through pages of financial records. "There might be a way to move faster, if you're willing to wear a wire." "What kind of wire?" "We know Meridian is panicking. Your daughter-in-law's disappearance has them scrambling to contain damage. If we can get you into a meeting with key players, record them admitting to the conspiracy. You want me to walk into a room full of people who killed my son? With full federal backup. We'd control every aspect of the situation." I considered this. At 67, I'd lived long enough to know that some risks were worth taking. My son had died trying to expose these criminals. Maybe his father could succeed where he'd failed. What about Malik? Complete protection. Safe house with federal marshals until the operation is complete. I looked at my sleeping grandson again. This boy had already been through too much upheaval. But if we didn't stop these people now, he'd never be safe. How would it work? Agent Hayes pulled out her phone, scrolling through contacts. "We set up a meeting. Tell them you have evidence that could incriminate your daughter-in-law, that you want to make a deal. They'll jump at the chance to contain the damage. They'll want to kill me. Not if they think you can help them. Clarence mentioned you found multiple flash drives. We let them believe you're willing to hand over evidence in exchange for money and protection." Clarence spoke up for the first time in 20 minutes. Vernon, this is incredibly dangerous. So is doing nothing. I made my decision. Set up the meeting. Agent Hayes nodded grimly. I'll need 48 hours to coordinate with the task force. We'll have surveillance teams, backup agents, recording equipment. You won't be alone in there. She started packing up her laptop, then paused. Mr. Thompson, there's something else you need to know. She pulled out a manila folder containing surveillance photographs. My stomach dropped as I recognized the images. My house, taken from multiple angles over several days. Pictures of me loading Malik into the car, of us walking into the library, of our visit to the bank. These people have been watching you longer than you realize. And they're planning something for tonight. The last photograph showed two men in dark clothing approaching my front door. It was time-stamped 3 hours ago, right around the time we'd left for Clarence's house. We'd escaped by pure luck. Next time, we might not be so fortunate. We're not hiding, I said, standing up from Clarence's couch. If these people want to come after an old man and his grandson, let them try. But I'm not running. Agent Hayes looked at me like I'd lost my mind. Mr. Thompson, you don't understand the resources these people have. Military-grade surveillance, corrupt law enforcement, unlimited money for hired killers. And what do you have? She paused, considering the question. Federal authority. Forensic accountants. Wiretap capabilities. A task force that's been waiting 2 years for evidence like this. Then use it. Tonight. Malik stirred on the couch, mumbling something about dinosaurs in his sleep. This innocent boy shouldn't have to wake up in a world where his grandfather was hiding from murderers. Vernon, Clarence said quietly, maybe we should listen to Agent Hayes. Take Malik somewhere safe while the FBI builds their case. How long did you say that would take? Months? I shook my head. These people killed my son and abandoned my grandson. Every day we wait is another day they're planning to finish the job. Agent Hayes studied the surveillance photos again, her jaw tight with frustration. Then she pulled out her phone. Special Agent Hayes calling Priority 1. Yes, sir, I need immediate authorization for Operation Clean Sweep. We have evidence, sir. Complete financial records, government corruption, cartel connections. Sir, tonight. She hung up and looked at me with new respect. You just triggered the largest corruption raid in Georgia history. We hit Meridian Construction, county offices, and 12 different government buildings simultaneously at 6 a.m. What about the people watching my house? They're about to have bigger problems than tracking down one grandfather. The next 6 hours moved like a controlled explosion. Agent Hayes coordinated with teams across 3 counties while Clarence made calls to his media contacts. I stayed with Malik, explaining as gently as possible that some bad people had hurt his daddy, but the good guys were going to stop them. Are you one of the good guys, Grandpa? He asked over breakfast at Clarence's kitchen table. I'm trying to be, son. At exactly 6 a.m., Agent Hayes' phone started ringing with updates from the field teams. Meridian Construction, secured. So Martin Wade in custody. County Courthouse, secured. Commissioners Coleman and Martinez arrested. State buildings secured. Senator Constantine refusing to cooperate. Each call brought confirmation that 2 years of investigation were finally paying off. The evidence DeMarcus had died to protect was bringing down the entire network. Vernon, Agent Hayes said, ending another call, they found $3.2 million in cash hidden in Wade's office. Plus computers with files that match your son's evidence exactly. By noon, the story was breaking on every news channel in Georgia. Clarence's contacts at the Atlanta Tribune had published a detailed expose titled, Construction Corruption, How Cartels Bought Georgia. The article featured quotes from Agent Hayes and detailed descriptions of the money laundering scheme my son had discovered. My phone started ringing with calls from reporters wanting interviews. I declined them all except one, a local news crew that promised to focus on DeMarcus's heroism rather than sensationalizing the corruption. Your son died trying to protect taxpayer money and expose criminals, the reporter said as cameras rolled. How does it feel to see justice finally served? It doesn't bring him back, I said, but maybe it prevents other families from going through what we've been through. That evening, our neighbors started showing up at Clarence's house. Mrs. Patterson from down the street brought a casserole. The Johnsons brought flowers. Word had spread through the community that one of their own had taken on corruption and won. We always knew you were good people, Mrs. Patterson said, hugging me tight. But we never knew you were heroes. Malik played in the backyard with neighborhood kids while adults discussed the arrests and raids. For the first time in days, he looked like a normal 8-year-old instead of a traumatized refugee. But the biggest surprise came at 8 p.m. when Agent Hayes arrived with news that changed everything. "We found your daughter-in-law," she said. "Portuguese authorities arrested her in Lisbon 3 hours ago." My stomach tightened. Is she talking? She's demanding a lawyer and claiming she was coerced into everything. But Vernon, she wasn't alone when they found her. Agent Hayes showed me a booking photo from the Portuguese police. Keisha stood next to a man I didn't recognize, middle-aged, expensive suit, the kind of soft face that belonged to someone who'd never worked with his hands. Richard Castellanos, Agent Hayes explained, CFO of Meridian Construction. He's been missing since yesterday morning, right around the time we started the raids. They ran together. Gets worse. Castellanos had $2.8 million in cryptocurrency wallets and plane tickets to 3 different countries. They were planning to disappear permanently. I thought about Malik playing outside, laughing with other children. His mother had been ready to abandon him forever for money and a new life with a stranger. What happens now? Extradition hearings. She'll fight it, but the evidence is overwhelming. Murder, conspiracy, money laundering, fraud, she's looking at life in prison. If you're following this story and want to see how justice finally caught up with everyone involved, make sure you're subscribed because the final confrontation between this family and the people who destroyed it will shock you. Agent Hayes packed away her files and prepared to leave. Mr. Thompson, what you did today, standing up instead of hiding, it's going to save lives. The task force estimates this network has laundered over $200 million in cartel money. That stops now. As I watched her drive away, I realized something had changed. For the first time since DeMarcus's death, I wasn't afraid anymore. The hunters had become the hunted, and justice was finally coming home. But Keisha's capture in Portugal was just the beginning. Her extradition would bring her face to face with the family she'd betrayed, and the final reckoning was still ahead. The international scope of Keisha's crimes hit me like a freight train the next morning when Agent Hayes called with updates from Portugal. Your daughter-in-law had 3 different passports, she said over the phone. Maria Santos, Carmen Rodriguez, and Diana Silva. She's been building false identities for over 2 years. I sat at Clarence's kitchen table, watching Malik eat pancakes and ask Ruby about her garden. This boy had no idea his mother was an international fugitive with multiple identities. How far does this reach? I asked, keeping my voice low. 3 countries so far: Portugal, Spain, and the Cayman Islands. Financial records show she moved money through banks in all 3 locations. We're talking about a money laundering network that spans continents. The breakfast in my stomach turned sour. Keisha hadn't just stolen from our family, she'd been part of an operation that crossed international borders and involved criminal organizations I couldn't even pronounce. Agent Hayes, what does this mean for Malik? It means his mother is facing charges in multiple countries. Extradition to the United States, plus international warrants for financial fraud. She's looking at decades in prison even if she cooperates. Over the next week, the story kept expanding. Richard Castellanos, the CFO who'd fled with Keisha, had connections to cartels in Mexico and Colombia. The Portuguese police found evidence linking him to drug trafficking operations worth hundreds of millions of dollars. But the biggest shock came when Agent Hayes discovered the full scope of political corruption. Vernon, we need to talk, she said, arriving at Clarence's house with a thick folder of documents. What we found goes beyond local officials. This reaches the state capitol. She spread photographs across the dining room table. State senators, congressional representatives, even a federal judge, all receiving payments from the same network that had killed my son. Governor's office? I asked, though I already knew the answer from her expression. Not the governor directly, but 3 of his closest advisors. The construction contracts they approved sent money straight to cartel operations. I stared at the photographs, recognizing faces I'd seen on television and in newspapers. These weren't small-time crooks skimming money from road repairs. These were major political figures who'd sold out their state for drug money. How many people are going to prison? If we can make all the charges stick? 47 so far, with more arrests coming daily. That evening, I had to explain to Malik what was happening in terms an 8-year-old could understand. Mama made some very bad choices, I told him as we sat on Clarence's back porch, watching fireflies blink in the gathering darkness. She took money that didn't belong to her and helped bad people do illegal things. Is that why she left me? The innocent question nearly broke my heart. She left because she was scared of getting in trouble. But leaving you was the worst choice of all. Malik thought about this for a moment. Are you going to leave me too? Never, I said, pulling him close. I'm your grandfather. My job is to keep you safe and make sure you grow up knowing right from wrong. Did Daddy know Mama was bad? Your daddy figured out that bad people were stealing money. He tried to stop them because he believed in doing what's right. That's why those people hurt him. I could see Malik processing this information, trying to understand how the adults in his life could be both heroes and villains. It was too much complexity for a child, but he deserved truth appropriate to his age. The media attention was getting overwhelming. Reporters called constantly, wanting interviews about the elderly grandfather who'd brought down a criminal empire. I agreed to speak with one national news program, but only if they focused on DeMarcus's integrity rather than sensationalizing the corruption. Your son died defending honest values, the reporter said during the interview. How do you want people to remember him? As a man who couldn't be bought, I replied. As someone who believed that doing right was more important than staying safe. But while we were dealing with media attention in Georgia, events in Portugal were moving rapidly. Keisha's legal team was fighting extradition, claiming she'd been coerced into the criminal activities by threats against her life. She's trying to play the victim card, Agent Hayes explained during one of our regular check-ins, claiming Castellanos forced her to participate through intimidation. Do you believe that? The evidence doesn't support it. Financial records show she was receiving payments 18 months before your son's death. She was a willing participant, not a victim. If you're watching this story unfold and wondering how justice catches up with people who think they're above the law, hit that subscribe button right now. Because what happened when Keisha finally faced the family she destroyed will leave you speechless. The extradition hearing was scheduled for the following month. Portuguese authorities were confident they could send her back to face American justice, but international law moved slowly. She's going to fight every step of the way, Agent Hayes warned. Expect delays, appeals, diplomatic complications. Rich criminals with good lawyers can stretch these proceedings for years. Will she eventually come back? Eventually, the evidence is too strong and the crime's too serious. But it might take time. As Keisha sat in that Portuguese jail cell, I knew she finally understood what my son had died trying to expose. But her capture was just the beginning of true justice. The real reckoning would come when she finally had to face the family she'd betrayed and the community she'd helped corrupt. 3 weeks after Keisha's arrest in Portugal, Agent Hayes arrived at Clarence's house with news that made my hands shake worse than the night those men came to my door. Vernon, we know who ordered your son's murder, she said, setting a thick file on the dining room table. And it goes higher than we ever imagined. She opened the file to reveal surveillance photos of a man I recognized immediately from television news. Georgia State Senator Marcus Wade, the same politician who'd been pushing for increased construction spending across the state, the man who'd made his career fighting for infrastructure improvements. Senator Wade? I stared at the photograph, trying to process this revelation. He's been on TV talking about government transparency and fighting corruption. Classic misdirection. Wade has been Meridian Construction's primary political protector for 8 years. Every major contract they received went through committees he controlled. Agent Hayes spread out financial records showing the scope of Wade's involvement. Monthly payments of $50,000 disguised as campaign contributions. Property purchases at below market prices. Even luxury vacations paid for through shell companies connected to the cartel money. Wade wasn't just taking bribes, she continued. He was the architect of the entire operation. The one who figured out how to move drug money through government construction contracts without triggering federal oversight. I thought about all the times I'd seen Wade on the news, talking about serving the people of Georgia, fighting for working families. The man had been laundering cartel money while giving speeches about public service. How much money are we talking about? Total net worth? $47 million over 8 years. Wade personally received over $6 million, but that's just what we can trace so far. The scope of the corruption took my breath away. This wasn't just about my son's murder anymore. This was about a criminal enterprise that had been stealing from schools, hospitals, and infrastructure projects across the entire state. Wade knew DeMarcus was getting close to the truth, Agent Hayes said, pulling out a transcript I wasn't prepared to read. We found recorded phone conversations between Wade and Keisha from 2 weeks before your son's death. She handed me the transcript, but I couldn't make myself read past the first few lines. Wade, your husband is asking too many questions about the Highway 75 project. Keisha, I've been trying to keep him focused on his regular work, but he won't let it go. Wade, then we need to solve the problem permanently. My daughter-in-law had been reporting my son's activities directly to the man who ordered his murder. She'd been a willing participant in planning DeMarcus's death. There's more, Agent Hayes said gently. Financial records show Keisha received a $200,000 bonus payment 3 days after the funeral. Blood money for helping them cover up the murder. I had to step outside onto Clarence's back porch to get air. The magnitude of the betrayal was overwhelming. Not just theft or fraud, but the cold-blooded planning of my son's death by people he trusted. Malik found me there 20 minutes later, sitting on the porch steps with tears on my face. Grandpa, are you sad? Yes, son. I'm sad about what happened to your daddy. He sat beside me, his small hand patting my shoulder with the instinctive kindness children show when adults are hurting. Are the bad people going to jail? Yes, all of them. When I went back inside, Agent Hayes was on the phone coordinating with what sounded like dozens of federal agencies. The investigation had expanded beyond Georgia. Wade's network had connections to corruption cases in Florida, Alabama, and South Carolina. Interstate criminal enterprise, she explained after hanging up. We're looking at RICO charges, which carry life sentences for the primary conspirators. What about Wade? Has he been arrested? Tomorrow morning. Simultaneous raids on his home, office, and 3 bank safety deposit boxes. We've been watching him for weeks, waiting for all the evidence to come together. That evening, I had to explain to Malik that the scope of the bad choices some adults had made was much bigger than we'd originally thought. Remember how I told you Mama helped bad people steal money? Well, those bad people included someone very important who was supposed to protect people instead of hurting them. Like a police officer who becomes a robber? Exactly like that. Someone who promised to help people but chose to hurt them instead. The next morning brought chaos. Wade's arrest at the state capitol created a media frenzy unlike anything Georgia had seen. Television crews from national networks descended on Atlanta as the full scope of the corruption became public. My phone rang constantly with interview requests, but I only agreed to speak with one reporter, the same local journalist who'd covered DeMarcus's story with dignity rather than sensationalism. "Mr. Thompson, did you ever imagine your investigation would expose corruption at this level?" "I was just trying to understand why my son died," I said. "I never expected to find a criminal network reaching the state government." But the most disturbing discovery came that afternoon when Agent Hayes called with updates from Wade's interrogation. "He's trying to make a deal," she said. "Claims he can provide evidence against federal officials who were also involved." Federal officials? Wade says the network includes people in Washington. Congressional staff members who helped coordinate federal funding for the fake construction projects. Maybe even a federal judge who dismissed previous investigations. The corruption wasn't limited to Georgia. It was a national network using taxpayer money to launder cartel cash across multiple states. "Vernon, we need you to testify before a federal grand jury next week. Your evidence started this investigation, but we need your testimony to connect all the pieces." I thought about facing Wade in a courtroom, looking at the man who'd ordered my son's murder. The idea should have terrified me, but instead I felt a calm certainty. I'll testify. DeMarcus deserves to have the truth told. That night, as I tucked Malik into bed, he asked the question that had been bothering me all day. "Grandpa, why did the senator want to hurt Daddy?" "Because your daddy was honest, and honest people are dangerous to criminals. They can't be bought or scared into staying quiet." "Is that why you're not scared anymore?" The boy's perception amazed me. "What makes you think I'm not scared?" "You stand up straighter now. Like Daddy did when he was proud of something." Standing in that doorway, watching my grandson settle into sleep, I realized he was right. The fear that had consumed me since that night at the airport had transformed into something else. Determination, purpose, the knowledge that we were finally fighting back effectively. When Agent Hayes showed me the recorded conversation of Keisha and Wade planning my son's murder, I finally understood the full scope of evil we were fighting. And I knew my testimony would be the nail in their coffins. Justice was coming. Not just for DeMarcus, but for every family these criminals had destroyed in their 8-year reign of corruption. The hunters had finally become the hunted. 6 weeks after Keisha's arrest in Portugal, Agent Hayes called with the news I'd been waiting for. "She's coming home," she said. Portuguese authorities approved the extradition. Keisha lands at Hartsfield-Jackson tomorrow at 2:47 p.m. My stomach twisted at the thought of my daughter-in-law returning to the same airport where this nightmare had started. The place where Malik had whispered his warning, where Keisha had walked away from her son without looking back. Will she be arrested immediately? Federal marshals will take custody the moment she steps off the plane, then straight to the federal courthouse for arraignment. I thought about telling Malik his mother was coming back, then decided against it. The boy was finally sleeping through the night again, finally laughing with other children. I wouldn't destroy his peace for a woman who'd chosen criminals over her own child. But Malik surprised me the next morning at breakfast. "Grandpa, is Mama coming back?" I nearly choked on my coffee. "What makes you ask that?" "I dreamed about her last night. She was crying and saying she was sorry." He stirred his cereal thoughtfully. "But in the dream, I didn't want to hug her anymore." The wisdom of children cuts straight to the heart of things adults spend years avoiding. Malik understood, better than any of us, that some betrayals change people forever. "Yes, son. She's coming back. But not to stay with us. She has to answer for the bad things she did." He nodded like this made perfect sense. "Will you have to see her?" "Probably. I might have to tell a judge what I know about the people who hurt your daddy." "Will you tell them she was mean to Daddy?" "I'll tell them the truth." That afternoon, I watched the news coverage of Keisha's arrival from Clarence's living room. The media circus was overwhelming: news vans, reporters shouting questions, federal marshals escorting a figure in handcuffs and an orange jumpsuit through the terminal. For a moment, seeing her on television, I felt something unexpected. Not anger or hatred, but profound sadness. This was the woman who'd held my grandbaby as an infant, who'd sat at my Christmas table, who'd called me Papa Vernon, like I was really her father. All of it had been lies. The arraignment hearing was scheduled for the following Monday. Agent Hayes called that evening to discuss my potential testimony. Keisha's lawyer is claiming coercion, she said. Says she was threatened into cooperating with the conspiracy, that she feared for her life and her son's safety. Do you believe that? The timeline doesn't support it. She was receiving payments 18 months before your son started asking questions. She was a willing participant from the beginning. But the bigger news came Tuesday morning when Wade's arrest finally happened. I watched live television coverage as federal agents led the state senator out of the Capitol building in handcuffs, past cameras and reporters shouting questions he refused to answer. How does it feel to see the man who ordered your son's death finally arrested? A reporter asked during my own brief interview outside the courthouse. It feels like justice is working the way it's supposed to, I said. But it doesn't bring back my son. The community response was overwhelming. Church members brought meals every day. Neighbors offered to help with Malik's schooling. Local businesses displayed signs supporting our family's fight for justice. But the most touching support came from unexpected places. A group of construction workers who'd known DeMarcus organized a fund for Malik's college education. They raised $50,000 in 2 weeks, calling it the DeMarcus Thompson Memorial Scholarship for Honest Workers. Your son was good people, one of the workers told me. He would have helped any of us if we needed it. Now we help his boy. The preparation for grand jury testimony was intense. Federal prosecutors spent hours walking me through questions, helping me organize evidence, explaining courtroom procedures. They wanted to make sure I could present the facts clearly without being intimidated by defense lawyers. Remember, the lead prosecutor said, "You're not on trial here. You're telling the truth about crimes committed against your family." But the most disturbing development was Keisha's attempts to contact me from jail. She'd been calling the county jail daily, trying to reach either me or Malik. When I refused the calls, she started sending letters through her attorney. "Vernon," one letter began, "I know you hate me, but please let me explain. I never wanted DeMarcus to get hurt. They threatened to kill me and Malik if I didn't cooperate. Everything I did was to protect my family." I threw the letter away without finishing it. Lies wrapped in victim language, manipulation disguised as explanation. The second letter was different. Desperate. "I know you think I'm evil, but I loved your son. The money was supposed to be for Malik's future. I was going to take him with me once things settled down. Please don't let them destroy me completely." Agent Hayes reviewed the letters and shook her head. Classic manipulation tactics. She's trying to create doubt about her guilt before the trial. Will they work? Not with the evidence we have. Financial records don't lie, Vernon. Recorded phone conversations don't lie. Her own emails discussing your son's murder don't lie. The third letter arrived the day before my grand jury testimony. This one made my hands shake with rage. If you really loved your son, you wouldn't destroy the mother of his child. Malik needs me, Vernon. He needs his mother, not an old man who doesn't understand how the world works. Don't take away his last parent. I called Agent Hayes immediately. She's threatening me through Malik. Keep the letter. It shows consciousness of guilt and witness intimidation. Her attorney is going to regret letting her send these. That night, I sat with Malik on Clarence's back porch, watching stars appear in the clear November sky. "Grandpa, do you think Mama really loved Daddy?" The question I'd been dreading. I think she loved the idea of the life he could give her. But real love means protecting the people you care about, not hurting them for money. Like how you protect me? Exactly like that. Real love is about sacrifice, not selfishness. As I tucked him into bed that night, Malik asked one more question that broke my heart. "When you have to see Mama in court, will you tell her I still love her but I can't forgive her?" The night before my testimony, Malik climbed into bed beside me and whispered, "Grandpa, Will telling the truth bring Daddy back? I held him close, knowing that truth wouldn't resurrect the dead, but it would honor them. The federal courthouse in Atlanta looked like a fortress that Tuesday morning. Metal barriers lined the sidewalks, federal marshals checked every bag, and news crews from 3 states crowded the front steps. I'd never seen so much security for a court hearing. "Mr. Thompson, you ready for this?" Agent Hayes asked as we walked through the metal detectors. She wore her best suit, the kind federal agents save for important trials. "I've been ready since the night my son died," I said, adjusting my tie. Clarence had helped me pick out my best church suit, navy blue with a white shirt and red tie. Lorraine had always said I looked distinguished in navy blue. Malik was staying with Ruby Washington for the day, playing in her garden and helping her feed the birds. He'd hugged me tight that morning and whispered, "Tell them about how good Daddy was." The courtroom was packed. Media representatives filled the gallery, sketching artists set up their easels, and federal prosecutors organized thick stacks of evidence at their table. But my eyes went straight to the defendant's table where Keisha sat in an orange jumpsuit, her hair pulled back severely, looking like a stranger. She'd lost weight during her months in jail. Her face was thinner, older somehow. When our eyes met across the courtroom, I saw something I hadn't expected: fear. Not the calculated coldness she'd shown at DeMarcus's funeral, but genuine terror about what was coming. "The government calls Vernon Thompson," the prosecutor announced. Walking to the witness stand felt like the longest journey of my life. Every eye in that courtroom was on me: reporters, federal agents, politicians, criminals. But I thought about DeMarcus and found my strength. "Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?" "I do." The prosecutor was a sharp woman named Maria Santos who'd spent weeks preparing me for this moment. She started with basic questions: my name, my relationship to the victims, my background working for the Postal Service. "Mr. Thompson, can you tell the court how you first discovered evidence of the conspiracy that killed your son?" I told them about the flash drive, about finding the safety deposit box, about the files showing millions of dollars in laundered money. My voice stayed steady as I explained how DeMarcus had stumbled onto the truth and died for it. "When you discovered these financial records, what did you do?" "I did what my son would have wanted. I took the evidence to people who could use it to stop the stealing and the killing." The prosecutor walked me through each piece of evidence: bank statements, construction contracts, recorded phone conversations. Every document was projected on screens around the courtroom so everyone could see the scope of the conspiracy. "Mr. Thompson, did your daughter-in-law Keisha Thompson ever tell you she was involved in this criminal enterprise?" "No. She lied to our family for years while helping the people who murdered her husband." Keisha's defense attorney objected, but the judge allowed my statement to stand. When it came time for cross-examination, Keisha's lawyer tried everything he could to discredit my testimony. "Mr. Thompson, isn't it true that you have no formal training in financial investigation?" "No formal training. But I can read bank statements and recognize when money is being stolen." "Isn't it possible you misunderstood legitimate business transactions?" "Sir, there's nothing legitimate about paying killers to murder construction workers who ask inconvenient questions." The lawyer tried a different approach. "Mr. Thompson, you're clearly angry about your son's death. Isn't it possible that anger has clouded your judgment about my client's involvement?" I looked at him directly. "My son is dead because your client sold him out for money. My grandson was abandoned by his own mother for money. If you think anger clouds my judgment about that, you don't understand the difference between justice and revenge." The courtroom was completely silent. Even the sketch artists had stopped drawing. "Your Honor," the defense attorney said, "I move to strike that emotional outburst." "Overruled," the judge replied. "The witness is answering your questions, counselor." The prosecutor's next questions focused on the recorded conversations between Keisha and Senator Wade. "Mr. Thompson, have you heard the recordings of conversations between your daughter-in-law and State Senator Wade planning your son's murder?" "I have." How did those recordings make you feel? I paused, thinking about how to put the emotion into words. Like I was listening to strangers plan to destroy my family for profit. Like everything I thought I knew about the woman who married my son was a lie. The prosecution played the recordings for the courtroom. Keisha's voice, cold and calculating, discussing my son like he was a business problem to be solved. Wade's voice authorizing murder like he was approving a construction contract. When the recordings ended, the courtroom was dead quiet. Several jurors were staring at Keisha with expressions of disgust. "Mr. Thompson," the prosecutor continued, "can you tell the court about your son's character?" This was the question I'd been preparing for, the chance to honor DeMarcus's memory. "My son was the most honest man I've ever known," I said, my voice growing stronger. "He couldn't be bought, couldn't be scared into staying quiet when he saw a wrong being done. He died because he believed that protecting people was more important than protecting profits." I looked directly at Keisha as I continued. DeMarcus loved his family more than life itself. He worked double shifts to provide for his wife and son. He never missed a school play or a baseball game. He was the kind of man who stopped to help strangers change flat tires. My voice broke slightly. He deserved a wife who loved him enough to honor his memory, not one who sold his life for money. Several jurors were wiping their eyes. Even some of the reporters looked emotional. "Mr. Thompson, what do you want this jury to understand about your son? That he died a hero. That he chose to do right even when it was dangerous. That the people who killed him thought they could silence the truth, but truth doesn't stay buried when good people are willing to dig for it." The defense attorney had no questions on redirect. What could he say? The evidence was overwhelming, the recordings were clear, and my testimony had connected all the pieces of the prosecution's case. As I stepped down from the witness stand, I caught Keisha's eyes one final time. For the first time since DeMarcus's death, I saw genuine remorse there. Not the calculated tears of someone trying to manipulate a jury, but real grief for what she'd lost and what she'd destroyed. But remorse couldn't undo murder. Justice demanded its price. Outside the courthouse, reporters surrounded me with questions. "Mr. Thompson, how does it feel to see your daughter-in-law finally facing justice?" "It feels like my son can finally rest in peace," I said. "But this isn't about revenge. It's about making sure no other family goes through what we've been through." If you've been following this story and want to see how justice finally catches up with everyone who destroyed this family, make sure you stay with us because the verdicts that came down will restore your faith in the American justice system. Agent Hayes walked me to the parking garage. "Vernon, you did beautifully in there. Your testimony connected every piece of evidence into a story the jury can understand. What happens now? Closing arguments tomorrow, then jury deliberation. With evidence this strong and testimony this powerful, I expect quick verdicts." As I drove home to collect Malik from Ruby's house, I realized something had shifted during my testimony. Speaking DeMarcus's truth in that courtroom had lifted a weight I'd been carrying since his death. For the first time in over a year, I felt like his father again instead of just a man seeking revenge. The final verdicts would come soon. And when they did, justice would finally be served. The jury deliberated for 3 days. 3 long days of waiting, checking my phone every few minutes, trying to keep Malik's routine normal while my stomach twisted with anxiety. Agent Hayes called twice a day with updates. "They're taking their time, which is good," she said. "They're going through every piece of evidence methodically." On the 3rd day, Thursday afternoon, the call finally came. "Vernon, they have verdicts. Court reconvenes at 4 p.m. My hands shook as I hung up the phone. After everything we'd been through, the investigation, the arrests, the testimony, the next hour would determine whether justice truly existed or if powerful people could still buy their way out of consequences. Clarence drove me to the courthouse while Ruby stayed with Malik. I decided not to bring my grandson to hear the verdicts. Whatever happened, he didn't need to see his mother's final judgment delivered in a crowded courtroom. The media circus was even bigger than during testimony. News vans from CNN, Fox, and every major network lined the street. Reporters recognized me as I walked up the courthouse steps, shouting questions I didn't answer. Inside, the courtroom was packed beyond capacity. Federal marshals had to turn people away at the door. I took my seat in the front row, directly behind the prosecution table, where I could see everything clearly. Keisha was led in wearing the same orange jumpsuit she'd worn for 3 days. Her eyes found mine immediately, but I didn't look away this time. Let her see the face of the family she'd destroyed. Senator Wade sat at a separate defendant's table with his team of expensive lawyers. Even in federal custody, he carried himself with the arrogance of someone who'd never faced real consequences for his actions. "Has the jury reached verdicts?" Judge Martinez asked. "We have, Your Honor," the jury foreman replied, standing with several sheets of paper. My heart hammered so hard I could feel it in my throat. On the charge of conspiracy to commit murder in the first degree against defendant Keisha Thompson, how do you find? Guilty. The word hit the courtroom like thunder. Behind me, I heard gasps and scattered applause from spectators before the judge called for order. On the charge of money laundering in violation of federal statutes against defendant Keisha Thompson, how do you find? Guilty. On the charge of conspiracy to defraud the United States government against defendant Keisha Thompson, how do you find? Guilty. 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 18 separate charges, 18 guilty verdicts. Keisha's face crumpled as the reality hit her, life in prison without possibility of parole. Then came Wade's verdicts. On the charge of conspiracy to commit murder against defendant Marcus Wade, how do you find? Guilty. On the charge of racketeering in violation of federal RICO statutes against defendant Marcus Wade, how do you find? Guilty. 23 charges against the state senator. 23 guilty verdicts. The man who'd used his political office to launder cartel money and order murders was going to spend the rest of his life in federal prison. When the jury finished reading verdicts, the courtroom erupted. Reporters rushed for the exits to file stories. Family members of other victims hugged and cried. Federal agents smiled and shook hands. But I just sat there, feeling empty. Relief, yes. Satisfaction that justice had been served. But also profound sadness that none of it would bring DeMarcus back. The sentencing hearing was scheduled for the following month. Both defendants would have opportunities to address the court before receiving their final punishments. More importantly, victims' families could deliver impact statements. I knew exactly what I wanted to say. 6 weeks later, I stood at the podium in the same federal courtroom, looking directly at the two people who destroyed my family. Your Honor, my name is Vernon Thompson. I'm here to speak for my son DeMarcus, who can't speak for himself because these defendants had him murdered for trying to do the right thing. My voice was steady, stronger than I'd expected. Behind me, I could feel the courtroom's complete attention. DeMarcus was 28 years old when they killed him. He was a husband, a father, a son who called his old man every Sunday after church. He worked hard, paid his taxes, and believed that honest people could make a difference in this world. I looked at Keisha, sitting stone-faced at the defendant's table. My daughter-in-law betrayed the man who loved her, abandoned the child who needed her, and destroyed a family for money. She chose greed over love, corruption over integrity, murder over morality. Then I turned to Wade. Senator Wade used his political office to protect criminals and silence honest citizens. He turned government service into personal profit and transformed public trust into private gain. My voice grew stronger as I continued. But they made one critical mistake. They thought they could silence the truth by killing the messenger. They forgot that some truths are bigger than the people who discover them. They forgot that justice doesn't die when good people are murdered. It just finds new champions. I looked toward the gallery where Agent Hayes sat with other federal investigators. My son's death exposed a criminal network that stole millions from schools, hospitals, and infrastructure projects. His murder led to investigations that will protect communities across multiple states. DeMarcus died believing in justice, and his death proved that justice still exists for those brave enough to seek it. The judge nodded as I concluded. Your Honor, I don't ask for revenge. I ask for sentences that ensure these defendants never again have the opportunity to destroy families or corrupt public institutions. I ask for justice that honors my son's sacrifice and protects other families from experiencing what we've endured. When I finished, the courtroom was silent. Several jurors from the original trial had returned for sentencing and were visibly emotional. Keisha received life without parole plus 50 years on the federal charges. Wade received life without parole plus 35 years. Both would die in federal prison. As the defendants were led away in shackles, Keisha turned back toward me one final time. I saw her mouth the word, sorry, but I didn't acknowledge it. Some betrayals go too deep for apologies. Outside the courthouse, reporters surrounded me again. Mr. Thompson, how does it feel to see complete justice served? It feels like my son's sacrifice meant something, I said. But the real victory isn't these sentences. It's the fact that dozens of other families won't go through what we've experienced. If you've been following this incredible journey from tragedy to justice, and you want to see more stories about ordinary people fighting extraordinary corruption, subscribe now because justice stories like this prove that truth always wins when good people refuse to stay silent. That evening, I called Malik into the living room at Clarence's house. Son, the people who hurt your daddy are going to prison forever. They can never hurt anyone else again. Malik thought about this for a moment. Does that mean we won, Grandpa? Yes, son. We won. Standing at my son's graveside with the verdict papers in my hand, I finally felt DeMarcus could rest in peace. But our journey wasn't ending. It was beginning a new chapter. 6 months after the sentencing, life had found a new rhythm for Malik and me. We'd moved back to my house in Macon, but it felt different now. The fear that had haunted us for so long was gone, replaced by something I hadn't expected, peace. Real peace, the kind that comes from knowing you've done everything possible to honor the people you love. Malik was thriving. The trauma counselor said he was processing the abandonment and loss better than most adults would. He'd started asking questions about his father's character instead of his death, which felt like progress. Grandpa, tell me about when Daddy was my age, he said one evening as we worked on his homework at the kitchen table. He was just like you, I said, helping him with a math problem. Curious about everything, always asking questions, never satisfied with simple answers. Is that why he found out about the bad people? That's exactly why. Your daddy couldn't ignore wrong when he saw it. The Victim Compensation Fund had provided financial security we'd never expected. Between the federal settlement and the scholarship fund the construction workers had established, Malik's education was secured through college. More importantly, we could afford the therapy sessions that were helping him heal. But the biggest change was in our community. The corruption investigation had triggered reforms across Georgia's construction industry. New oversight committees, mandatory financial audits, stricter bidding processes for government contracts. DeMarcus's death had protected countless families from future fraud. My phone still rang with interview requests, but I turned down most of them. A documentary film crew wanted to tell our story, publishers offered book deals, speaking bureaus invited me to conferences about fighting corruption. I declined them all. Why don't you want to be famous, Grandpa? Malik asked when I hung up on yet another reporter. Because this story isn't about me, I said. It's about your daddy's courage and making sure other families don't go through what we did. The one interview I'd agreed to was with a local community college that wanted to use our story in their criminal justice program. Teaching young people about integrity felt like something DeMarcus would have supported. Agent Hayes visited regularly, updating us on related investigations. The corruption network we'd exposed had connections to similar schemes in 4 other states. Our evidence was helping prosecutors build cases that would protect communities for years to come. Vernon, you realize what you started here has become a model for other corruption investigations, she said during one visit. The FBI is using your case to train agents on following financial evidence in organized crime cases. Good. Maybe next time somebody tries to launder cartel money through construction contracts, investigators will know what to look for. But the most meaningful recognition came from unexpected places. The construction workers who'd known DeMarcus organized an annual memorial scholarship in his name. Local schools invited me to speak about integrity and courage. Church groups asked me to share how faith had sustained us through crisis. Your son's legacy is growing, Pastor Williams told me after I'd spoken to his congregation. Every person who hears this story learns something about choosing right over easy. Malik was adjusting to his new reality with remarkable resilience. His teachers said he was excelling academically, making friends easily, showing leadership qualities that reminded them of his father. The abandonment by his mother had left scars, but they were healing. "Do you think Mama thinks about me?" he asked one night as I tucked him into bed. "I think she regrets her choices every day," I said honestly. "But that's her burden to carry, not yours. I'm glad I have you instead of her." The simple statement hit me harder than any jury verdict. This boy, who'd lost so much, still found ways to express gratitude for what remained. Our evening routine had become sacred time. After homework and dinner, we'd sit on the front porch, watching neighbors walk their dogs and children play in yards. Normal life, the kind DeMarcus had worked so hard to provide for his family. "Grandpa, when I grow up, I want to help people like Daddy did," Malik said one evening as we watched the sunset. "What kind of help?" "I want to catch bad people who steal money from schools and hospitals. Agent Hayes said I could be an FBI agent if I study hard." The thought of my grandson following his father's path of protecting others filled me with pride and worry in equal measure. But if he inherited DeMarcus's integrity along with his sense of justice, he'd be fine. The final legal proceedings concluded that fall. Asset forfeiture from the criminal network had recovered $47 million in stolen taxpayer money. Schools received new funding, hospitals got equipment they'd been denied, and infrastructure projects that had existed only on paper finally became reality. But the real victory was simpler than any financial recovery. Malik and I had survived. We'd honored DeMarcus's memory by finishing what he'd started. We'd proved that ordinary people could fight extraordinary corruption and win. If you followed this entire journey from tragedy to justice, from a grandfather's desperate investigation to a national corruption scandal being exposed, then you understand that truth really does have power when good people refuse to stay silent. Subscribe and share this story because it proves that age and experience can be weapons against corruption when wielded with courage and determination. 1 year after the verdicts, I received a letter that surprised me. It was from a construction worker in Alabama who'd been inspired by our story to report safety violations at his job site. His courage had prevented a scaffolding collapse that could have killed 6 men. "I thought about your son when I made that call," he wrote. "Figured if DeMarcus could die for doing right, I could risk my job for keeping people safe." That letter joined dozens of others from people across the country who'd found courage in our story. Teachers who'd reported administrative corruption, police officers who'd exposed department cover-ups, government workers who'd blown the whistle on waste and fraud. DeMarcus's legacy was spreading far beyond what he could have imagined. That evening, as I helped Malik with his science project about local ecosystems, he looked up from his notebook with serious eyes. "Grandpa, are you happy we didn't run away from the bad people?" "Yes, son. Running away would have meant they won. And now they're in jail forever. Now they're in jail forever." He returned to his project, satisfied with this resolution. Children need to believe justice exists, that good people can overcome evil through courage and persistence. As I watched him work, I realized something had fundamentally changed in both of us. We'd started this journey as victims, an elderly man and an abandoned child, running from forces we didn't understand. We'd ended it as victors, having exposed corruption that reached the highest levels of government. That night, after Malik was asleep, I sat in my recliner and thought about Lorraine. My late wife would have been proud of how we'd handled this crisis. She'd always said that character reveals itself in difficult times, that you can't know who you really are until you're tested. Well, we'd been tested, and we'd passed. Today, Malik is thriving in school, our neighborhood is safer, and corrupt officials learned that underestimating an elderly grandfather was their biggest mistake. Because when you threaten family, you awaken something that age only makes stronger: the determination to protect what matters most.